Steve Wyche, who has almost too many jobs to name, but you know him best from the NFL Network, where he is a reporter and an analyst, and also a local to Atlanta, former Falcons beat writer for the AJC. So he knows a thing or two about the hometown team. But Steve, how are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, Will, thanks for having me. And I used to cover Ovie
Yep.
back when Ovie was clearing holes,
Yep.
man. When they were just bring that off tackle stuff, against Brady Papinga and guys like that.
Yeah.
And Ovie was just clearing holes so guys could get into the end zone. So no, I'm doing great, man. It's great to be on this podcast.
No, Steve, it's great to have you, buddy. I remember when you first, I first saw you. You're always walking around, getting the scoop, talking to the guys. We're old. You have gray hair. I got gray hair. We're still young, man. Time flies. Goodness gracious, lots happened.
Hey, time flies, but you know what? I think we're all maximizing the time that we have.
Oh yeah, and I mean, Steve, I'm sure you did the old reporter trick when the scrum was in front of one player. You kind of sneak off to the side, go get your one-on-one time in the locker room. That's the real move there. But
that was my MO, and I've always lived by that. You guys got me. Sorry about that.
There you go. You came back.
I dropped for a little bit. Yep. No, that was my MO. I mean, I always lived by that, where you zig when the others zag, and I learned that trick when I was working down in Miami covering the Dolphins, and the camera crews and stuff would follow the beat writers, and so we'd go over to Dan Marino, we'd go over to Trace Armstrong or Richmond Webb or some of those guys, and everybody would follow. And then I would walk over to them like, okay, I tell you what, I'm going to come back in 5 minutes to talk to you.
Yeah.
And so I'd bounce, and everybody else would be there like, so that was kind of my thing.
Oh yeah, and then the other key is you go find somebody like Ovie, because
no one's talking to me.
The run game could have the run game.
That's not true, Ovie. No, Ovie's a demon deacon. He went to Wake Forest. I was like, okay, this dude's smart. He's going to give me some good stuff.
Oh yeah, that's the move. Foye coming out of Yale, one of the first guys that I went to introduce myself to when he was a rookie. So, but Steve, you wrote a column for AtlantaFalcons.com recently, right before the Jets game, and I think it really accurately depicted where a lot of Falcons fans' heads were at the time. It was, all right, you won your first game against New York. You looked pretty good for spurts of the Washington game, but you still let it slip through your fingers, and now you really can't let that Jets game get out of hand and end up a loss. Your season's essentially done at that point. They didn't do that. They won the game, even though that third quarter got a little bit dicey and it looked like some of those old tendencies were going to pop up. It didn't. They won the game. It was gritty, kind of like that New York game, but we continue to see progress. So how are you feeling now about the Falcons coming out of the bye week? Are you feeling any different, or have your expectations changed in any way from where they were going into the season with this team?
Well, they haven't changed because I figured it'd be a season of fits and starts, right? Where they would look good, and then they would have a little bit of turmoil and then look good again, because that's the way this roster is built, right? You've got Matt, the veteran, and then you've got kind of some guys on one-year deals, and then you got some young offensive linemen. And then on defense, it's kind of built, again, guys in the secondary on one-year deals. You've got, some really good linebackers. You've got a few decent interior linemen, but no real winners on the edge, right? One-on-one type winners. So, when they match up against certain teams, they're going to be able to get by with some of the things they do. When other teams, it's going to be a bad matchup for them. And the things that I do like is, Cordero Patterson. And besides just the production he's giving them, I think he's showing other players how to play football, right? Every time he touches the ball, he's doing it at 100 miles an hour. Doesn't matter where he's catching it. Doesn't matter whether he's taking a handoff. He's going full speed. Like, it means something to him. And that clearly is not the case for some of these other players, because we have seen some receivers get short arm going across the middle, right? We have seen some guys not make plays when they're standing right there in front of them. And so, you see some of these guys play well. Some of these other guys stepping up. Mike Davis when he's got his opportunities. But Kyle Pitts, that Jets game, because you didn't have Ridley or Gage, it forced Arthur Smith to throw everything out of the window and make him a focal point. And hopefully they stick with it, because he's your 4th overall pick. He's the guy you're building around. he's shown himself to be able to do it, stick with it, and open up your offense a little bit more.
No, I love it, Steve. I mean, you mentioned how we're built and expectations and Kyle Pitts, and these are all things that I was going to ask you questions on. But since you brought them up, with the expectations that the Falcons have for this team, are we built to win? Are we built to be successful this season, or is this season a wash? Because a lot of fans are on that fence as, do we look for a draft pick this year, or are we trying to sneak into the playoffs? Are we built to win?
It's a great question. It's 5 games in, right? They're 2-3. You can't say the season's a wash yet. But again, I don't think this is the type of team, and Ovie, you've been on these teams where you can go on a 4 or 5 game winning streak. Right? I just don't think they're talented enough through the roster. We've seen what 1 or 2 injuries can do to this defense. Right? It was already a defense that was very questionable. Again, like I said, you've got no one-on-one winners on the edges. Right? AJ Tyrell's a stud, but you got issues on the other corner, and the secondary's kind of hit or miss. They're having to scheme up a lot of things that they're trying to work on. So I don't think they're the type of team that can go on the type of extended win run that gets you into the playoffs. At the same time, I don't think that's what the season is about. I think it is building steadily as you go, and then also doing the hardest thing that there is to do once you get into the regular season, and that's develop players, right? Because, Ovie, this. You are planning, and basically it's not a week. You're practicing Wednesday, you're practicing Thursday, you're walking through Friday and Saturday. So you're game planning for your next appointment or your next opponent, right? So how do you get the Jalen Hawkins of the world ready, getting them reps, kind of game look reps when they've got people in front of them? How are you getting Richie Grant ready? And that's a hard thing to do, but the good teams manage to do it. I live in LA. The Rams develop players. I mean, you look at their defense, you can name Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, but not many more because they develop guys, and the next year they're ready, right? So the Seahawks do that very, very well. I mean, there's certain teams that constantly do that. Can this Falcons team do that? Because, again, this year there's going to be so much churning of the roster after the season. All those guys on one-year deals will be gone. They're going to be bringing other people. They just have to figure out where, because there's a lot of directions they can go. A lot of us are thinking, quarterback is what they have to do, but you know what? You look at the prospects coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to make that move. I mean, as much as people may want to get rid of Matt Ryan for who? They're not trading for Deshaun. They're not giving up the freight it's going to take for Deshaun Watson.
Listen.
So,
Steve, but I think that was a great point that you articulated there, because I want to kind of look at it from the other side of the lens there, in the people who are in charge of making that progress happen. How do we evaluate this coaching staff and the job that they do throughout the season if, like you said, a couple of injuries can derail everything? It becomes really hard to get the type of reps without meticulous planning and organizing on an organizational level for how you structure a day. It's really hard to get players who are young those actual game-like reps unless they're playing in a game. And at that point, their inexperience is probably going to show. So what does progress from a coaching standpoint look like to you this season? It probably isn't on-field results, but what are small signs that maybe fans can latch onto to know, okay, this coaching staff is doing its job, even if it's not translating into wins and losses on Sundays?
I think as the season goes on, and see if some of those young players, you got to get them on the field. You have to let them take their lumps, right? And see if they learn from them, because you can't just sit here. And here, this is the biggest misnomer. All of us who cover this game and watch this game think, okay, this cornerback here, he's coming out, he's playing a cover 2 scheme, and, he gets baked on the back quarter because he didn't carry his man all the way through, whatever it is. It changes based on opposing personnel. It changes, like it's all matchups. There's so many different things. And Ovie, you know this, right? When you're going through a lead block against a certain team that may play, let's say, an even front, 4-3 front. So you're going through a middle linebacker. Well, one middle linebacker may be a chase and pursuit linebacker. Another dude may be a hard rock that you got to take on a certain way. Right? So some guys are going to look good some weeks and not look good some weeks because they're going against different personnel they've never played against before. And they've got to kind of figure things out. So you have to eventually get them on the field. You can't just wait until the season is so-called lost because then guys are going there with completely different agendas. Those young guys are stressing to impress their coaches. The veterans are ready to pack their bags and get out. Right. And so you've got to get them some type of in a rotation now to see what they can do under pressure. You got to rotate the bodies through and say, okay, it's 3rd and 15. How's this guy going to hold up with 2 minutes left on the clock? Is he going to play to keep the receiver from going out of bounds? Or is he going to make a mistake and let him make a catch 15 yards downfield and get out of bounds and stop the clock? There's all kind of things you have to do to test these players' football IQ that we as kind of the general layman don't think about. One of those guys who've been on the field like Ovie, they know exactly what situational football is, and that's the best way to test to see if a player's getting better.
That's good. Solid. That's real solid. Steve, one of the things that I'd love to hear from you is that, being that you have a bird's eye view. You're a beat writer for the Wild for the Falcons, and now work with NFL Network. You see all the teams, you cover all the teams. You have to know what's going on. With obviously the Falcons are nowhere in the upper echelon of teams, but like, how soon do you think we can turn it around to where we can be like we were when I was there, like in 2010, when we had 13-3 season, and we had like 11 guys going to the Pro Bowl, and Mike Smith had really found a way to get us moving. We all had the belief, we all had that desire, we had the passion. Defense wasn't quite where offense was, but again, we had Roddy White, Julio Jones, Tony Gonzalez, and Claybo, Harvey Dahl. We were just stacked on offense, and I want to get back to that point, because as not bleak, but as far as we've seen from getting to that point, you were there at a time when we had that Michael Vick situation. We had Joey Harrington, Byron Leftwich, Chris Redmond, and no one ever thought we'd get to the point where we were a 13-3 dominant team, having a bye week. How did the Falcons get back to that? How long does it take them to get back to that?
Ovie, it doesn't take long. It doesn't take long, because you just talked about that 2007 season, which was just an absolute dumpster fire, right? But then you come in, you draft Matt, right? You add Michael the Burner Turner right behind you, right? You have an offensive line coach that takes the same talent. Remember, Paul Boudreaux came in
was the best.
And took an offensive line, right? Took an offensive line that everyone said was hot garbage, put them in a scheme where they could all play on a thread, and you guys got to the playoffs, right? Now there was an attitude change. Clearly, the coaches, and not to say that there wasn't bad coaches on Petrino's staff. I mean, he had Mike Zimmer, he had Hugh Jackson, he had Jerry Rosburg, Joe Witt. I mean, it was a really good staff, but they just didn't work in harmony. Like the way when Mike Smith came in, he had his guys, they worked a certain way and said, right. So, they said, okay, here's the type of offensive line we have. We've got a zone scheme, right? We're not going to muscle anybody. And they designed stuff around their talent. And then when they saw that Matt could play, I'll never forget Matt's first practice in minicamp. He was throwing behind everybody. Roddy, Joe Horn, all these guys. They were frustrated. Like, this is the dude? And then the next mini camp, everybody was like, oh, okay, because he's putting the ball on the money. He just had never played with guys that fast before, guys who ran routes as precise as them. So they saw that Matt worked to get better in that short period of time by that second mini camp. So it takes absolutely changing personnel. It takes a coaching staff understanding what everybody's strengths are. It sounds cliche, but it takes a staff, the coordinator, asking the O-line coach, asking the run game coordinator, asking the wide receivers coach, working with the tight ends coach, what do these guys do well? And then they work collaboratively to come up with a plan. Okay. And then overall, it takes a leader, which I think Arthur Smith is, to get everybody on the same page. But remember, this is a roster. This is a very janky roster.
That's generous.
I mean, like I said, it really is. I mean, you don't have a ton of playmakers. Okay, you got Matt, you got Cordero Patterson, who nobody thought was going to be doing his thing.
Yeah.
AJ Tyrell and Kyle Pitts. I'm sorry, I can't put Calvin Ridley in that group right now because he's been inconsistent. He has made some plays where to me, looks like he was making some business decisions when contact was coming his way. It's very, it's very kind of surprising. Yeah, I mean, even on the sideline, not even across the middle.
Yeah.
So they've got to get some playmakers here because Ovie, you tell you, I talked about all the things that they just did, in the early phases of kind of that rebound, that bounce back, but there were playmakers all over the place. You had dudes who could get it and hit it. And this team just does not have that. So they've got to find playmakers on both sides of the ball. And that might take a little time.
Steve, I love the point that you made about coaching staff having to really play to or use their players to their strengths. And that's something that I don't think enough of the football public understands. And it's the same reason why we're sitting here during draft season and saying, man, imagine adding CeeDee Lamb to that offense, or imagine adding this player to this offense. And it's kind of like, yeah, but you got to figure out how to make it work. Given how disjointed this roster is with, 2 new players on the roster who are your 2 starting running backs. And Matt Ryan's in his first year working with these guys. Alongside of that, a whole new offensive coaching staff. Dave Brock is the only holdover there. So this bye week, how important is it, because it comes so early in the season, for this coaching staff to really kind of pull up the hood on this car, figure out, okay, we've seen now that Cordarrelle Patterson is kind of doing what he's been doing, how do we utilize him in other ways? How do we get him more involved? Kind of Kyle Pitts had his breakout game. How much do you expect this offense to maybe change coming out of the bye week because they've had this early chance to really look at what their players have been able to do so far?
Great question. It's going to steadily evolve, but I think we've seen it, right? Okay, they realize Jalen Mayfield is not a tackle, right? They move him inside. First couple outings were a little rough, but now he looks real. Right, he looks like a real starting NFL interior lineman. And you're starting to see this offensive line establish itself more and more. That Jets D-line is a physical defensive line with Quinn and Williams and guys.
Yeah.
And they just handled them. Right? Those guys up front just handled. Lee Smith, tight end, was really doing work. And so I think now they're starting to see, okay, we can do this with this particular look. We can line up Patterson wide and take a linebacker out of the way and boom, send Mike Davis, off tackle or up the middle or something. So I think they're starting to see things because these coaches, it's not just your personnel. Again, you have to see what other teams are trying to do to stop your personnel. Right? And that's the cat and mouse game of coaching. So I think these guys, the one thing I hope they don't do is when really engaged come back, all of a sudden diminish Kyle Pitts. Because first off, I couldn't believe the Jets were just singling him up over and over, and I was like, "My God, he's all they have."
One
in the pass
team was
game.
going to do it.
You're singling him up. But if they double him up, then that's going to free up Gage, or that's going to free up Ridley. So keep on doing the things you're doing with him. Use him like the Raiders used Darren Waller. I think defensively, it's a little tougher. They're not a very physical defense in terms of imposing themselves. Just based on how they're built. And you've got some guys in the secondary who are trying to figure it out. So that's going to be a little bit more of a slow burn. But I do think that this coaching staff is pretty quickly figuring out what guys' strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, with strengths and weaknesses, you mentioned Kyle Pitts. I want you to go a little bit more into that because, I've been able to see Matt Ryan coming as a rookie, high pick, a lot of expectations. He lived up to it. Julio Jones came in as a rookie, high pick. Well, we traded for him, traded the world for him, high expectations. Somehow Julio, exceeded those expectations. Kyle Pitts, the expectations are through the roof, and they are expecting him to be, Tony Gonzalez, times 10 and the best tight end ever to play in the history of tight ends. And I don't know if it's fair to say he has a slow start because it's only week 4 or 5. And, week 5, he showed that a 100-yard game could be what we see from Kyle Pitts every single week. How do we not mess this up? Because he could be a gem for the Falcons. How do the Falcons deal with Kyle Pitts in order to encourage him to continue to give us consistent 100-yard games and to help us win now this season and in the future?
Well, a lot of it's on him, too, with recognition. See, when he's on the field, if he's lining up wide, or if he's the second man in a bunch and he's the front guy, or if he's the back guy, recognition of how the defense is trying to play you, and are you going to end up being the number 1 option, number 2 option? So some of it's going to be on him, some of it's going to be on scheme. But the thing he's got to keep doing now is he's got to feel how wonderful that tasted. Like, I can do this. Like, I'm real, right? I'm a real dude. I'm catching touchdowns. I'm moving the chains. I'm getting open, intermediate, deep, and short. oh, now they got somebody following me. I'm a decoy that's going to open something up. Like he's got to realize all these things are happening just because of his presence. And I think the coaching staff is going to continue to try to use him. Matt, now trust him. You know that if Matt doesn't trust you, you ain't seeing the ball unless it's a desperate move.
I dropped the ball one time in a big game, big situation. Like 3-4 games, like Matt would not go to me because he's like, there's Michael Turner. I'll throw it to Michael. I was like, come on, you know Mike has terrible hands. Throw me the ball, Matt. He's like, man, that third down 3 games ago, you burned me. I said, come on, man. So I would literally stay after practice and just catch balls and jugs. Like, see, Matt? See, I'm practicing. See, I'm ready. And I would just focus on every ball he threw me, catching it, tucking it, running it. You have to, and it shouldn't be that way, but people have long memories, and Matt remembers if you're a guy that he can trust or a guy you can't. So Kyle Pitts needs to stay on his good side, and right now he's on it.
Yeah, I mean, and Matt's going to go to him, I think, when they come out against Miami. Because Miami's going to bring the smoke. That defensive front is as physical as it gets, right? So running the ball against them might not be easy early if they're not connecting in the pass game. And Miami's going to put Eric Rowe, right? They've got a safety. Eric Rowe's kind of their nickel safety. They man him up on tight ends. He is their designated tight end stopper. Okay, so how's Kyle going to do over 4 quarters having some dude in his grill nonstop? Yep. Right? That's what Miami does. They did it with Darren Waller. Darren Waller tore him up. They threw him the ball 20 times. Wow, you're going to keep on doing this? I'm going to keep on killing you. Right? And so that's how it's going to work. Again, this is part recognition with Pitts, part trust with Matt. And Matt's going to go to him, see if he can handle it. And if not, I got other options now. So, I mean, that's just how it works. And it's not going to be a 100-yard game every week, especially at that kind of hybrid position. He might only get 4 targets, but what he does in carrying a defender and creating a certain void in the field for somebody else to excel is just as important as him having, 7 or 8 catches and a touchdown.
Yeah, and the Falcons have not been afraid with how they've used him so far. I mean, they have been as adventurous as any team, I think, in their personnel groupings. They've gone 5 wide out of 13 personnel multiple times this season.
But that's Arthur Smith. That's what Arthur Smith does.
That's Arthur Smith. Yeah,
he did in Tennessee,
and which is why Kyle Pitts is kind of the perfect player to really pair with somebody like that. But I think I remember talking to Mike Mularkey, and this kind of even ties into it a little bit more. He was saying tight end, he thinks behind quarterback is probably the second hardest offensive position to learn as a young player because you're a part of everything. You're a part of the run blocking. You're a part of the pass packages, the different personnel groups. I mean, you just have to learn so much. And Kyle Pitts is having to learn it all, right now with the spotlight as bright as it is on him. But somebody who had to do that last year and who I heard you bring up among the players who are kind of star players, I guess, for the Falcons right now is AJ Tyrell. I think he's had an incredible start to the season.
Good player, man.
He's not being tested, but when he is, he's not really giving up much yardage, which was kind of the problem with him last year was he was in the right position, but he was still giving up some tough contested catches, but still giving up the catch. What have you seen from AJ Tyrell so far this year?
Confidence, physicality, knowing his opposing personnel, and understanding what he's supposed to do in the scheme. I mean, it is a scheme. DPs wants the front 7 to be incredibly physical, and just personnel-wise, they're not built that way, right? So I just think Tyrell, teams know he's that guy. He's big. He's a really big corner. But he just seems to understand things a lot more, especially in this adjusted scheme. And that's huge. It's coming up. He's going to be tested. The Falcons have got to start putting points on the board, so teams have to start throwing the ball a little bit more in his direction. But I just think he's a special player that no one's talking about because, he plays for the Falcons right now.
Yeah, and he's no Trayvon Diggs making, 5 interceptions so far this season.
Yeah,
Trayvon
Diggs is going to end the season with 6 interceptions because nobody can be throwing the ball his way anymore. The teams haven't learned. They better learn.
Oh, man, much to the chagrin of my fantasy team that has a defensive player inexplicably. But Trayvon Diggs has made me happy in that area so far. Ovie, we got time for one more question. You want to hit Steve with it?
Shoot, it's probably a real question. I'd like to hear Steve kind of think of way back when you first started with the Falcons and you were in the locker room seeing actually feeling the vibe of the team, and you being day in day out beat writer for AJC and with the Falcons, you kind of understood the culture. Right? You probably saw the culture change from with Petrino to Mike Smith, but also from the players and the coaches. It went from inside out. It changed the whole team. Can you talk about the change that you saw and how it's kind of hard to describe it, but that feeling that you had a chance to witness occurred in the locker room that made us a team that couldn't even sniff the playoffs. We're happy to win 4 games to a team that can contend. And I don't know if you've been in the locker room recently, but how can they recreate that?
Yeah, great question. First off, we can't get into the locker room because of COVID protocol, which stinks. I really, really wish, because that's the best part of what I do is kind of going in. I can tell now because of my years of doing this, which teams have good chemistry and which teams are going to good. I can watch the way teams practice in training camp and say, okay, this team's going to be pretty good if they stay healthy. Or getting into the locker room. But to get to the first part of your question, as you know, during Petrino, guys weren't necessarily even feeling him
at all
in the mini camps in the off season. I remember talking to Keenan Forney, the guard. I was asking about Petrino, and Keenan was like, I can't really tell you anything about him yet. We'll see. And that's the telltale, he's not treating you. But I could tell, because Keenan's like, you treat me like a decent person. I got you. So I think, Bobby came in treating guys like, they were still on scholarship. He did not understand that these are grown men, and y'all had some personality. Like, you can't treat Lawyer Malloy or John Abraham like that, or John Abaddon like that.
Or D'Angelo Hall.
You couldn't D Hall, Tyson Clabo. Come on. You couldn't do guys like that. But then Mike Smith came in and was like, hey, basically, I'm going to treat you like a man. You treat me like a man. And until you don't, we're good. And I think you had that. But then I also think the fact that because you guys went through everything you went through, it was so united. Ovie, I remember your locker. You had the O-line just to your right. You had the tight ends near you, and then you had the running backs and quarterbacks, right? You'd be mingling with McClure and Clabo with those guys, and the Algie Crumpler at the time, or Tony would come down and talk to Matt and talk to Roddy or talk to Joe Horn. There was just such a, we're all in this together, even though you had offense on one side and defense on the other. Keith Brooking was over there, talking to certain guys. And, it was just a really, it's like it was when I first started covering the team in 2005 when they were a playoff type team, right? Everybody was kind of, we're in this together. And that's a hard thing for teams to get, because once those doors close, guys have different lives, right? And so I don't know where this team is in that regard. And watching the team practice in training camp, there was just seemed like so much of a feeling out process. Okay, how what's the coach going to do here? What's this rotational group going to do there? So I don't know where they are right now because I'm not there every day. But from what I saw against the Jets, as we know, not a good team, but the confidence that the Falcons played with on both sides of the ball, if they can continue to say, we might be able to do something. Okay, we got a little something here. Even if they lose a ball game, that's something that's going to help them grow and evolve as the season goes along.
Good stuff.
Yep, and
I'm right about your locker, right, Ovie? Am I right where your locker location was? My memory serving me right?
No, you were right about my locker. It was dirty all the damn time because I didn't like cleaning up, but it was there. It was there.
Equipment staff wasn't coming by your locker to clean up for you, Ovie? You weren't getting that treatment?
I had to pay some of the guys just to clean up my mess. I felt so bad for them. I gave them tips.
Wow.
What were you leaving in there?
Oh my God.
Food. I had my pads, my smelly socks. I was so tired at the end of every practice. I didn't feel like putting it up in the right place. I just shed my skin and ran home.
You fullbacks.
Yeah.
You were good until you said the food part. Nobody's trying to clean up your French fries.
I was hungry. I saved food from lunch.
Oh man, Steve, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and for your perspective on this team. It's been a tough few years here in Atlanta. NFL wise, but hopefully this is the start of something bigger, even if it doesn't happen this year. It does seem like Arthur Smith has them at least turning in the right direction. Is there anything, everybody can see you on their TVs every single day if they're football fans, but is there anything else that you want to let our listeners know about?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're a Falcons fan, I mean, understand this is a growth period. I mean, you may not want to hear it, but if you haven't figured that part out right now, like I said, it's going to be fits and starts. Guys are going to look good one game, not so good. It's part of a process. I mean, that was Mike Smith's favorite word, but it eventually got him to a Super Bowl. Super Bowl appearance. So, or close to it, I should say. So, just kind of understand that it's gonna be a minute. Don't get too excited if they win a game or two in a row, and don't go burning up your tickets if they lose 2 or 3 straight games.
Yep.
All right, Steve Wyche, trust in the process. Those are his words to Falcons fans. Steve, thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it.
Steve.
Oh, thanks for having me on, guys.